Tomorrow, when your children look out their windows, what will they see? A world filled with beauty? A feast for the senses? Treated with respect? Will they do business with companies focused on the long term, who place the importance of the earth and her resources above all else? That's the road we're on. Care to join us? In the beginning, it was a simple idea: to lease and operate a sawmill. It started small, with a father and son partnership, a diesel-powered mill, and a knack for working with wood. The idea grew and grew into over 2 million acres of forest land in the United States. Deep inside this carefully managed land, another idea was born. We started building beautiful ways to embrace what's outside from the comfort inside. What's the most responsible way to do this? With careful use of the precious resources you need to make it happen, and a family of committed, talented people. You make use of everything. The bark and sawdust that's left over, you use it to create energy for the communities you live in. Then you replant, to bring back more trees, to keep the forest thriving. After all this, you learn something. When you focus on doing good work, good things happen. When you're more interested in getting it right than in getting attention, recognition comes. When you treat each other with respect, doing something you love, you build something that endures. When you set your sights on the long term, you make decisions that protect the most valuable things on earth. Our mission? To do it right, to never compromise, to make the best windows and doors you can buy in the most sustainable way possible, from seed to delivered product. So when you look through the glass of one of our windows or doors, you'll like what you see today and look forward to what you'll see tomorrow. Sierra Pacific, windows that never compromise.
Welcome. My name is Sarah Shelton, and I am the market editor at Luxe Interiors and Design. We're calling this segment today Windows on Tomorrow, and we're going to talk about just that, the wonderful world of windows. And we have quite the dynamic duo with us today to speak on the topic. We have designer, author, and all-around household name on all things design, Emily Henderson, and longtime window guru and Sierra Pacific Windows sales pro, Brent Gerard. Hi, Emily and Brent, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you?
So Emily and Brent, you two are in cahoots on a very special project right now. And Emily, I'm hoping you can tell us what you guys are working on and how you know Brent.
Yes. Okay. So my family, we made one of those semi-permanent decisions in 2020 to buy a farm in Oregon, which is where I'm from originally. So it's like a 120-year-old farmhouse property that had so much potential, but definitely needed a lot of help. And so I find that windows and doors are probably the most they're the most important architectural feature in the house, in my opinion. So, so one of the first things that we wanted to do is really assess how we can make this house our dream house in rainy Oregon. And moving from California, by the way, is a little bit tricky weather-wise. So we just knew that, especially because of that the windows and doors were going to be really important. So I reached out to Sierra Pacific, and Brent has been the most incredible customer service sales expert ever, because it was a big job, huh, Brent?
Yes, that was a big one.
Very closely together. And so that's how we know each other. And the project is going very well. We just got, by the way, just to give you an update, we just got the windows last week. They're being installed and they are so gorgeous that every time I go over there, I just get this insane burst of serotonin, because I know that this is going to make the house. And it finally is starting to come together. I'm very excited.
Well, we cannot wait to see more progress shots and, of course, the finished product. But Brent, you're with Sierra Pacific, and can you give us a brief overview of who they are, what they do, and where they're based?
Yes, Sierra Pacific Industries is our parent company and is based in, our headquarters is based in Anderson, California. And I work for the Windows division, which our headquarters is and plant is in Red Bluff, California.
Amazing. Emily, we are all familiar with your TV show, your books, your blog, and of course your Instagram. And we know you have guided many folks when it comes to design. And I liked what you said earlier, that you think that windows and doors are such an important architectural element. And I think that might not be something that everyday design enthusiasts may think about. So can you give us your thoughts on windows and what to keep in mind when homeowners or builders or renovators are making some of these very big window and door decisions?
I sure can. So it was probably like 4 years ago, I was doing a house in LA, our home there, and I brought in this architect, and I asked him on site, I was like, what is, like, where do you splurge? When you're doing a house. I loved his work, and that's what he said, windows and doors, which did surprise me. I just wouldn't have thought that. I don't know why. And then once I started thinking about it and looking around, I was like, oh yeah, like a room with pretty windows and doors is instantly a better room. Not only because of natural light, obviously, but also just the decorative elements or the lack of decorative elements that it can have. So now I'm obsessed with it, and I'm not trying to plug my book, but I just finished a book that comes out in a few months, and there's a huge windows and doors chapter because I think that, well, it's very intimidating. It's a long-term decision. It should be, and it is. It's not a cheap one, right? So you really want to make sure that you are armed with all the information so people can really make empowered choices and not make a mistake, because it's an expensive mistake to make. So yeah, I've done so much research, and now I'm like obsessed with it. And one of the reasons I want to work with Sierra Pacific, there's a lot of reasons, but I like the locality to Oregon, the fact that there is some of their harvesting is done in Oregon and Northern California. That just made me feel good, because I like to know where everything these days comes from and how it's being made. I think it's important, especially at a certain level, to make sure that you're making really intentional choices. And so that made me feel really good. I was like, oh, and I love all the stewardship that they do, and the fact that they have so many scientists on board. I think there's a fancier name for it, but that really care for the land and make sure that it's harvested sustainably. So I loved that. And then also they're just very pretty. And so when I was designing this house, we had these original windows on the second floor that are in pretty good shape, but they're this diamond pattern. They're called Dutch double hungs. And so we needed to figure out how to redo the first floor to work with those original windows. And the customization possibilities with Sierra was incredible. Like, we could really bring that diamond pattern downstairs in a way that still worked with some of our more standard grid patterns that we also wanted to put in, because we didn't want the entire house to have this diamond pattern. So working with Brent, we figured out how to do it, and they just arrived, and they're so pretty. And then another thing I just want to harp on for the rest of my life is, if you're going to do the windows, you need to really maximize your natural light and your views. And you need to walk through the space and be like, okay, if there was a window here, what am I going to be looking at? Is that where I want a window even to be? And then also, if you're going to put a window, scale up to make sure you're getting as much natural light as possible, especially in places like Oregon, where it's really gray, guys. So having all that indirect natural light bouncing around, it creates such a happier home instantly, and it makes it so much easier to decorate. You don't need to put a bunch of stuff in a room that has really pretty natural light and really pretty finishes. So it just makes your life easier just to have those features in that room and to have that natural light. So I'm really into windows.
Yeah, your passion is very clear. We love it. But it's good to know that, scaling up and really thinking about the view and the natural light just really makes such a difference. And I'm sure, coming from sunny California to Oregon, I mean, there's probably so many different factors to take into account when you were making these decisions.
One thing I love about Sierra's windows is all the finish options. So on the outside, we have aluminum cladding, which is really important for weather resistance and for longevity. Like they're not gonna rot. They're not gonna, they're gonna take on the hail and the rain really well. But then on the inside, we got this beautiful white oak. So it's like, and we were able to get the what do they call it? The mullions really thin, and so it just looks so high quality, so high end, and the white oak is so beautiful in person, you guys. There's other options with the wood too, but we really fell in love with the white oak. So it's like, you want to think about scale, you want to think about view, you want to think about like, how you're interacting with the natural world outside, but then also like how you're going to finish it off, like both on the exterior and the interior, to make sure that it's going to last as long as possible, and it is going to be as beautiful on the inside as possible.
These are some really great takeaways, and I cannot wait to see this white oak. It sounds quite chic. Brent, needless to say, you know the window world quite well. You've been with Sierra Pacific for quite some time. Can you walk us through some timely trends, and also on the flip side, maybe some tried and true takeaways when it comes to windows and doors in the home? I know Emily gave us some great examples, and I would love for you to add to that.
A lot of it boils down to your architects and your designers that come up with the house plans. And you'll see over the time period that depending on what style of house you're building will determine what style of window you're going to use in that area. And so over those times, a lot of that has stayed steady, but then I would say in the last probably 10 years, you've seen a lot of things really take off as far as not necessarily fully contemporary, but becoming modern. Like Emily's is a modern farmhouse, and it's not just the old farmhouse. And the more modern style house of where we're doing horizontal grids, and the color black on the outside and black on the inside is probably the most popular thing right now. And we have the more contemporary crank handles for your windows, your doors. So all the way from contemporary all the way to colonial, we can fit everything.
It does seem right now that, Brent, I think you might agree with me that architecturally there's less rules than I feel like there used to be with, I mean, I think it's very important to know the rules, by the way. And then like, I've just seen a lot of like creative ways of going against them that I think that has been really interesting to watch visually out in the field. Like, I think that it's like, you want to think about function first, right? You want to think about like, how are you going to actually use the window? Are you going to, is it casement versus double hung? And we talked about this, Brent, because a lot of the windows in our house are double hung upstairs, and casement is probably the most popular way, right, to use a window right now. So it's then just figuring out how to mix those, or if you can, and we did and can. And so it's like, you want to think about like, function, how you're going to actually use them. Do you want to go like this, or do you want to do this? And then go to style after that. Because I really liked how we mixed in some double hungs. I feel like it feels really traditional in the way that, but still modern, because the actual scale of the finish of the wood that we chose feels so like sleek and modern. So I just think that it was really fun working with Brent on it, because we could really go window by window and say, is this a casement double hung, or does it even need to operate anyway? And we have some that, Brent, you're going to freak out when you see them. We have some that are like 10 feet wide and 10 feet high, like in front of our bathtub. It's like I don't need to put anything else in the room when you have that. It's just such a feature. It's going to be so beautiful. So I don't want to just brag about my windows so much, but I'm so excited about them because we just got them.
I mean, you can totally brag about a 10-foot window in front of a bathtub. That sounds amazing, and sounds like it's magazine cover worthy. That's incredible. So Emily, you had mentioned this earlier. You had teased sustainability, and I think it's a great place for us to end. I know that, making sustainable decisions is near and dear to your heart when it comes to this dream project, building your home in Oregon. Can you tell us what kind of decisions you're making when it comes to that? And also, Brent, I would love for you to follow up, to tell us what kind of things that Sierra Pacific is doing in the realm of sustainability. So Emily, I will let you kick it off.
Yeah, so this project, I think more than any others, I've really just made this massive existential shift to make sure that I can be as local and be as sustainable with every single choice if possible. And I have a budget to do that, by the way. Like making these choices can be more expensive. So I think it's a real important thing for people, if you are, privileged enough to renovate your home, to make sustainable decisions, because the home renovation world is a culprit in a lot of ways to a lot of problems. So one of the biggest things, so I wanted to be local, which is why I love Sierra Pacific, because we're in the Pacific Northwest together. And then I wanted it to be purchasing once and forever. Like, these windows will last for the rest of my life. And that is the most important thing you can do for waste management, right? It's just buying once and making it last forever. And then also heat and coolant. I mean, that is a huge culprit with energy, obviously. So just making sure that your house is really sealed up. So you need really good windows to do that. You need double panes. You need to make sure that they are going to seal really well. Otherwise, you're not only spending a lot more, obviously, but you're really using up energy that you don't need to be. So it's just very important to me in this house. And it's also just knowing that I have a large audience that's reading and following, trying to influence their decisions too, because like I said, if you're privileged enough to renovate, I think that we all should be making really sustainable choices.
Amazing. And Brent, I know that Sierra Pacific is doing a lot in this world. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. We're actually truly a vertical integrated company. We own the land, we plant the seeds, we manage the land, we process the wood, we convert to lumber, and then everything that's left over gets reused. We have a cogen plant that burns and makes energy and gives back to the state. And then we assemble the parts, and then we have our own trucking division too, to where we truck and do that. And just recently in our Red Bluff facility for windows and millworks, we bought 30 acres and put up 30,000 solar panels in the back. And that almost covers enough power to operate both places. So it'll pay back over the time period, and then we're not wasting energy. We're building energy.
It's amazing all of the responsible decisions that this company is making, from, seedling to siding. I mean, it's incredible that you guys growing the wood that's making these windows, and then of course giving back energy to the local area. It's truly an amazing feat in this day and age. But I feel like we covered a lot here, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insight, and for teasing this amazing project that you guys are working on together. Like I said, we can't wait to see the finished product. Emily, best of luck with the rest of your build.
Thank you.
We can tell you're in good hands with Brent. And thank you to our DTV viewers who tuned in today. We'll be back soon with even more amazing content. Thanks, guys, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm Bruce Wells, the Director of Design and Marketing for Innovant. We partnered with Studios Architecture to design a private office line in 2020 during the pandemic. It quickly evolved into a discussion on private office and conferencing areas are going to actually merge together. So this year at NeoCon, we're introducing Palette, which is a new product line for Innovant. It's a new concept from Innovant. Essentially, it's meant to address the future of workplace in the private office and conference area. And we're hoping that the flexibility inherent in this product line will give clients and designers a good answer, or a comfort level that they can specify. Studios wanted to make it beautiful. Innovant wanted to make it really intelligent. Behind All of the products that you see here is a lattice that's wall mounted, so shelves, storage, wardrobes, desks, whiteboards, glass boards, and all different materials. So it becomes a very, very simple modular system. A key aspect of pallet, which is totally unique to the market, is that the lattice work that holds everything onto it is also essentially a cable raceway, vertical and horizontal cable raceway. So wiring from overheads, from lighting, from wardrobes, from technology enclosures, cabinets, credenzas, the desks themselves, all of the wire management required for those elements can be freely distributed throughout the back of the lattice itself and then concealed behind the tiles. And that's really a unique feature, and it should take a lot of confusion out of specification for customers, and the electricians and contractors will like that as well. We hope that we can build our presence in the marketplace within the private office and conference area.
What we want to go through is state of the market, and this is going to be my segment. I'm going to go really fast. So what we're going to talk about is millennials, right? Millennials are increasingly driving the trends. I don't know if you're finding this, but what's happening is as boomers shrink, millennials are obviously becoming more of the market. So what are they looking for? Less expensive projects, right? Because of their life stage, but more of them. So what 72%, really mostly medium-sized kitchens, right? And the average spend for medium-sized kitchen is anywhere from 50 to 75,000. Are you guys finding this as well? You're seeing more millennials, you're moving into more millennials, less boomers. Are you finding that the projects are less expensive? No? No? Good. Good for you. You know, what they also want, I think we, right? Everybody who's younger, they want mobile-friendly spaces, they want apps to control everything, and they want voice or motion sensor lighting. Why? Because they don't want to do anything. They just want to walk into the room and have everything happen. 30% share of kitchen projects. Somebody's laughing. Share of kitchen projects, integrated technology. So here's the disconnect. Everybody wants it, but what's happening? They're not really doing it. I know Rose is going to be talking about this more. She's probably going to kick me for taking over some of this, but they're basically, people want it, but they're not doing it for a lot of different reasons, and we'll get into that. Rose will get into that. And then top tech ask, video touchscreens. How many of you have a video touchscreen in your kitchen? Raise your hand. Is it smudge proof? Smudge proof? No, right? So what happens? It's a pain. It's a friggin' pain. And then more color, less shine. Is everybody seeing this as well? More color, less shine. These are the trends that we're seeing as we go forward. 43% more color. Now, does that mean white is going away? No. It just means that in addition to white, you're seeing other colors. Top colors, green and blue. Why green and blue? Anybody? Why green and blue? Sorry? Calming nature. Right. Everybody's kind of getting back. We're all kind of a backlash to what we just had happen in the last year and a half. We want to calm. We either want to be calm, we want to be happy. So schizophrenic. Less shine in fixtures, more matte and brush finishes, black, stainless, nickel, and pewter. How many of you in the last year have done an all black kitchen? Okay. I see a hand, but I see no head. Oh, all right. There you go. And how many of you have done black cabinets, cabinetry, right? So we're also leaning organic. And why are we leaning organic? Again, nature, but also guess what? Recycled. You know, that younger generation wants things that are recycled. They want wood. We're looking at wood. Larger kitchens because everybody's home. Expanded storage. More involved over the next couple of years. I'm going faster. You're going to see the average kitchen range, 25 to 50, almost 50% increase in the next 2 to 3 years. And why is that? You know why? Because everyone's spending more time there. You're going to work, you're going to entertain, you're going to learn in the kitchen. You can't just do one thing. So top storage ask, how many of you have pantries like this or have designed pantries like this in the last year? I know I want a pantry like this. I think I have one little cabinet that has everything in it. So what you're going to see is larger kitchens, 25% of the market, an average $100K spend. These aren't your general millennials. These are generally your boomers. So now we're going to move it. That was 4 minutes. I did a great job, I have to say. I did that all in 4 minutes. Okay, now we're going to move to key national trends. First up is Rose to talk about tech drivers.
So much talk about health and wellness trending, especially these last couple of years, right? And Pam touched upon those trends. And actually, $1.5 trillion business experts are forecasting up to 2024. That's a lot of dollars for you guys to think about and incorporating that into business. So think about designing into that. And also today I will touch on technology in the home built environment so you can help your clients have better health and wellness. So let's start with sleep. Sleep is, as it is a major factor of all that, the body requires sleep to function well. And our body has a natural process that follow a 24-hour cycle, and that's called circadian rhythm. You guys know about that. And there are many products that can stimulate this, kind of like our space that we're in now. There's a strip called Multi-Light, and what that does, it's one single LED strip, and it also actually has warm. It can start with warm light and goes up to cool light and then warm again. And you have the option or the end user to control that. And also, let's tell our clients to simplify their life. Why not introduce home automation system, which is voice-based user experience with just one interface. So you can have, I'd like to point it out, but see the iPad looking interface. It's just so much easier for your client to look at and then say, okay, I want a romantic dinner, like that picture. And your whole room kind of reacts to that mode. Also, there's voice activation and touch-free, and I talk about that because less points of contact, less bacteria to spread, right? And it just makes sense. And voice activation module by Brizo have been introduced, and all it is, it's almost like a plug and play. So if you have that technology, plug it in, this module, plug it in, and it'll, let's say you can talk to your fixture and say, dispense 1 cup of water, just 1 cup of water, no more, no less. And there's the Libero by Hayfala, where a sensor can activate the trash bin to open. I'm gonna just tell you all these new things that are out there. And another way to keep your environment clean is by having a clutter-free counter, right? So let's get everything off the table. Let's get the knife block off the table. With a press of a button, it can go up, it can go down. Whenever you need it, bring it down. And let's get all of your favorite wines off the counter and put it on the wall, just like the decor here. And also, there's a lot of multi-docking stations made by many manufacturers. Hayfala has a lot of different options as well. And what that does is allows you to plug in all your iPads, your iPhones, and everything, and put it in leave it in the drawer. And then instead of having the big jug of water, why don't you put it on the wall? You can have the standalone water filter dispenser, and there's a couple of ones out there. One is LK, which is what we have here. I think GE offers that too. And of course, we need to encourage our clients to be mindful of their eating. By doing that, we can introduce, there's actually this appliance that cultivates your own seedlings or whatever. It's called Home Gardening Cultivator by LG. And also, how about cooking without oils and butter? GE Monogram has this hot air fry mode, which crisps your food to perfection. And then what about the Signature Kitchen Suite? They have a cooking portion where you can cook with sous vide. And let's take you into the bathroom. Again, I'm going to talk about proper lighting, shift the mood from stimulating space in the living room, and at the end of the day, you might need that spa-like serenity after having such a busy day, and also maybe include a tub that encourages good health and well-being, or it actually heals with the introduction of hydrotherapy and chromotherapy, and that's been proven. Also, with the plumbing fixtures, you can have connected plumbing fixtures. I actually did this project where my client's he had this condition about his foot, and he says, well, he can't get into a cold shower right away, so he needs to really warm it up. So gets his smartphone, turns it on, and the water turns on, and he can actually monitor water. Other appliances in the house with smart appliances, you can find it in the laundry room, where you can preload detergent in the washing machine, and it dispenses the right amount based on the load size. Actually, all based on like the amount of soiled laundry that you have. And same with the dishwasher, they also have that. And also for the overall home protection, you can basically shut off the main supply line when this app tells you, okay, there's leak from such and such appliance. And you can monitor that from anywhere. And I think this might be my last one. And let's talk about technology and family. You can really have a connected family with this connected appliance. It actually connects with family members by sharing pictures and keeps the clutter off the appliance. So easy cleaning again. And you can keep the photo clutter out of that refrigerator. Finally, somebody. And you can stream music, watch a show, build a calendar, and so on. So I think that there's so many more out there, but I thought I'd introduce you to a lot of these other what's out there right now. So thank you.
Great job, Rose. I want it all. So here's my question for you. Guys, I get asked one question. Do many people think it's too complicated or too costly to be able to do all of this? Is it too complicated, too costly? Do any of your clients say to you that it is? And how do you answer that question?
Yeah.
How do you get them over that challenge?
Because the very first thing that they say really true about technology is that they don't want to put it in because they don't want any appliances that are smarter than they are. So, and I'm like, what? But really, honestly, their concern is it going to be outdated again after a while? And a lot of the manufacturers these days have a built-in software, so they can actually always update your most current software field. That answers your question.
That answered my question, Rose. Although I do want appliances to be smarter than me, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
Peggy, there you go. Design for life.
Okay, design for life because life happens. And sometimes I told you not to give me one of these because I talk with my hands. Where's my lavalier? Keep it there. Okay. It's more of a concept. It's not so much about a product. It's really how you use the products. Products, for the most part, even over the years, are kind of the same stuff. It's wood, it's plastic, it's stone, it's man-made or natural. It's how we use it, how we put it together that really makes it different and unusual. But design for life because life happens. Life happens when you least expect it, things change. You can be on the slopes having a lot of fun in your kitchen planning a wonderful dinner, or in your bathroom and slip on a slippery floor, and suddenly you're on crutches. You're in the hospital. It may be temporary, it may be permanent, or you could have a condition that becomes progressive and gets worse as the years go on. And that can happen very young. Somebody can be 6 years old, they can be 16, or they can be 60. And so it's not about aging in place. It's really about designing spaces for people at almost any age and any stage of ability or disability, because life happens when you least expect it. This is a bathroom that I designed for some people that I've done a lot of work for in Houston. This house happens to be in Alaska. Is that West Coast? I'm doing South, but she's a Southern lady, and this was a retirement place, is a retirement place, and that showers around that corner there. There's no door, there's no curb, and there's a linear drain where you can't see it right. Right-hand thing. So what you focus on ease of use, ease of maintenance, focus on wellness. Wellness is the big push right now in every arena. And what does wellness mean to the individual, whether it's a child, a teenager, a millennial, or one of the greatest generation? That would be me. And of course on quality of life, but again, what does quality of life mean to the person that you're designing for? I don't know if you can see in this photo, there's actually a skeleton back there at that cooktop. This was a kitchen we did, and the people had this skeleton on a roll-around thing, and we positioned him in the photo shoot back there. And so we use it every year about this time because it is almost Halloween. And there are multi-levels of places to sit. For our left side, a place to sit, to eat, to work, or prepare. Different kinds of countertop surface. This is a 1-hour presentation that we're squeezing down in 7 minutes. The best kitchens, BEST, they're beautiful, efficient, safe, and timeless. We're talking about trends here, but the best trend of all is to have everything that you possibly can have to be timeless. I had a kitchen that was on the cover of Country Living magazine over 20 years ago, and I pulled it out the other day, just came across it, and with the very few little things that would not be major, it was timeless. It could be today. It had floating shelves, which I'm not really a big fan of, but it had a lot of the things that we're doing today. And things kind of come around, go around, come back again. Ergonomics, combination of the word organized and ergonomic. A cabinet company a long time ago kind of coined this word and used it in some of their training. I haven't seen it used again, but it's really all about how you organize your kitchen or your bathroom or whatever space we're talking about, so that the use of that space, it was originally termed ergonomics for industrial use, for the workplace, and providing a workspace, work tool so that it didn't strain or tax the muscles and the physique of the human body. But we combine it into ergonomics and talk about the inside storage, behind closed doors, accessible storage. And so this is where I like to say everything should come to you. You should never have to get on your hands and knees to get anything. It should roll out, pull out, swing out, tilt out, whatever it has to come to you. Come to mama, that's what we say. More accessible storage. I think there's one similar to this up in the front display here. Most of these, not all, but most of them are remote cabinets. Everything should be easily accessible. The things that you store, you can see them, you can get to them. You can get to them because you can see them. Leading right into our next thing, which is let there be light, and lots of it. Light makes life safer. We have cabinets integrated with lighting. Under the cabinets is light. It's integrated into the structure of the cabinet. Inside the cabinets, that bottom left photo right there, you can see everything back in the back in that magic corner that comes out. Some of the lighting underneath base cabinets that are mounted on the wall, 10, 12 inches off the floor, provide a night light so that when it's on a sensor, so that when you walk into the bathroom, into the space, the light comes on. You don't even have to flip a switch. What you see is what you get. What you see is what you can get because you can see it. If you're doing kitchens for people, you come across these that people don't know what's in the back of that corner cabinet. They haven't been back there for years. Well, no more of that stuff. So these are a few pictures we'll get through pretty quickly. This is in Austin, and I put this in here in particular because we will put little notes on the top of things that are right and the things that could have been done better or more designed for life. But also I put this in there to remind me that the Austin city updated their city codes not long ago, stricter codes. Things like the front door, at least one entrance has to be ground level or no steps, and things like the light switches can't be over 48 inches above the finished floor. Light plugs, electrical plugs along the base in your walls can't be less than 15 inches, and there's a long, long list. Those are just some examples. And builders, there was a big crack over it, but it's been long enough now that they've all agreed that it's made a huge difference, and certainly it made a difference in the way people think about how they design, especially kitchens and bathrooms. By the way, the most dangerous rooms in the home, most home accidents happen in a kitchen and a bathroom. My brother, who's in the insurance business, tells me that most home murders happen in the bedroom. That's true. So here's another one, a bathroom showing a few things that they are right, open below the sink. This one is to remind you that when somebody's getting ready to build a house or remodel one, and maybe they're a millennial and they don't think they really need to do any of this stuff to prepare for what may or may not happen, at least convince them to put reinforcement in the walls so that if something happens, they need to put a grab bar or a support bar, they can do it. It doesn't have to be an institutional, commercial looking thing. There are really some good looking that look like towel bars, and in fact double as a towel bar that are used for support. No curb, linear drain, a bench with a handheld shower adjacent to it. I'll tell you, I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to take an extra minute here. I think the best way of talking to people about design, the best way of selling anything for that matter, is by telling stories. So I'm going to tell you a couple of quick personal ones in my own family. My daughter had a knee injury, a sports injury, when she was 13 or 14. Had to have a cast, had to learn to use crutches, bedrooms, all upstairs in our house at the time. And so she managed it, but she was young and agile and strong. But it was still very dangerous to do. My husband developed a condition, CIDP, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. I really can't say that. What that means is that he has lost the feeling in his feet and his hands, his fingers somewhat. And so it makes mobility a real issue, because if you can't feel your feet, you don't know what you're stepping on. You don't know if you're hurt, in fact. And so we remodeled our own home, and we put in a bath downstairs that has no curb, has a wonderful bench seat in the shower with a handheld there, beautiful support bars. I don't like to call them grab bars, it seems so aggressive. And so then, not too long ago, this same daughter with the knee injury had to have knee surgery. Right when you get older, it comes back to you. And so she had to come to our house at the Bay, where we've got all these wonderful things built out for my husband, to stay for a week or so until she could get back into her condominium, which was on the second floor. She now has bought a house, and she is completely, she's every one of these principles that we talk about to people every day in our own business. Here's our skinny cook again, showing in some notes here some of the things that we did right and might have done a little differently. I'm a big fan of shallow top storage for access. where you don't have to lean over at all. I've always done that in my own homes because I don't like to get up on stools and I don't like to get down on my hands and knees. But just keep in mind, any place you've got a place for tall, shallow storage, it's the best thing to do. Plan for now and plan for the future. This is another shot, that same house in Alaska, and I think we see it a little bit later in another part. How was that?
That was great. Thank you very much. All I want to do is get rid of my junk drawer. That's all I want to do. I have a junk drawer. I just want to get rid of it. But I have a question for you. Our clients are, give us a second, our clients coming to you and asking you for design for life, or are you convincing them?
A little bit of both. It's kind of become my specialty in our business, and so I get referrals from previous clients, and then the other designers will get, when somebody walks in the door and they look like they're not millennial, they tend to give them to me. But I also will suggest these principles to everyone because it applies to anybody at any age or stage of the building.
Thank you, Meg. Now we're on to Steve for luxury.
Luxury. So let's go back. Okay, so what has happened over a period of time? We're not able to travel, we're not able to entertain, we've not been able to experience our family, and goods and services, even haircuts became a problem. So what has happened? What was the effect? We got a glimpse of what was important to us and what we've missed. So a desire to live well now. So a lot of our clients, what we have found is that they've said, at first they wanted to downsize. Now they want to increase their living spaces. They've realized that how important their home really is to them and how important their family is to them as well. So in this photo, see, it happens to be in a high-rise here in Chicago, the 32nd floor, and their master suite was really important to them. So brought luxury to their home like never before. This room happens to be 26 feet long, and you'll see the high gloss cabinets, the wardrobe cabinetry on the left. That is all made by Woodmode. When I first entered the space, when it was completed for the photo shoot, the first thing I thought of was a luxury hotel. And I think that our staff, along with Woodmode, achieved exactly that. It's a sleek, tranquil, outfitted home with a hotel-like amenities. Now what? We're all forced to stay home. We have our family, and we're all on top of each other. This is also on the 32nd floor of a high-rise called 9 West Walton. And this unit is 7,200 square feet, one level. This family room on the right has 4 50-inch TVs, and all the millwork, including the coffered ceiling, was produced by Woodmode per our design. The Hermes blankets came separate. This is also part of the same room. The gentleman was a big cigar smoker. So right in the glass cabinet that has stainless steel doors on it, there's a 36-inch wide cigar humidor in there that holds 500 cigars. In the same unit off the kitchen, they have a separate sitting room. So created the cabinetry for us around the stone surround. And this is the fireplace. It's a little bit different than most that you're going to see. The fireplace surround is concaved. It's not very easy to do that with the granite. So this happens to be a mirror image of the family room you saw earlier, just one floor lower, but a completely different design, much more casual, using walnut veneer, floor to ceiling, and also has 4 50-inch TVs. Never enough TVs, right? in the same unit, now that we are all at home, we wanted to create a separate office space where the husband or wife of the family can conduct business from home. And the last slide is everybody needs to have a luxurious bar in their home. Especially now that things are starting to change a little bit, that we're spending more time at home. We want to be able to entertain and enjoy our families as much as we possibly can.
Okay, before we get to the cool factor, I
Yep.
have one question. Where did that gentleman smoke his cigars? In that fancy room, or did he hang out the window? What was he doing?
Well, if you're familiar with this particular building, it had a balcony that is 15 feet wide and 80 feet long. Yes, 80 feet long. 4 heaters, so he's out all year long smoking cigars.
Okay, now my other question is, what do you see most of your clients requesting? So we talk about luxury, we talk about the way it looks and feels, but what is the most requested ask, would you say, from your luxury clients? What do they want the most?
They want us to design something that represents them. I think that's most important. With social media today, there's so many different ideas out there that our clients come in with their own personal books, and which makes it a lot easier for us, for being designers, is that we can get inside their head through their lookbooks and through their ideas, and we can design specifically for them.
Thank you. Ryan, cool, as you can tell.
I think they gave me this category because I'm the next one up here, I guess. But I actually kind of like this category because it's pretty relevant, especially now, with everybody staying home, like Steve and a lot of the panelists have mentioned. People have really turned into not just what functions in my house, but what do I actually want it to be, and how do I make it that reflects more of my personality? So I think there's a lot of ways you can do that. One thing that people are looking for wow factors. This happens to be a media room where it's not just paneling anymore. This is metal integrated, shaggy carpets. It's if you notice the artwork, it's pretty nostalgic. It's kind of got a hip hop vibe. I think as millennials are getting older, this is what is going to be trending. Using unexpected locations. This happens to be a stairwell. And we did a really cool kind of a tiled pirate ship with a skull on it there, which everyone loves skulls. But this is something you could look at when you go up the stairs every single day. It's unexpected. You just don't expect to be seeing that in stairwell. So finding unexpected locations, I think, is a good way to bring in wow factor. Spaces that make you smile every time you walk in. The use of materials, stainless steel. Woodmo does a lot of stainless steel fronts. If you haven't seen them, you can check them out. They're in the back here. But the use of metal in what would seem to be a fairly modern way, but bring it into a bathroom, I think it's a great way to increase wow factor. Edginess. So, way to create edge, simpler walls, doing pattern tiles on floors, bringing geometry in, whether it's mirrors, tiles, industrial rise, using knurled finishes. These are things you guys are all seeing. They've been around for a while, but people are coming and wanting to see these things, and how are we as designers pulling it together to show them how all this works together. Adapting to lifestyle changes. Steve kind of touched on this a little bit, especially with bars in home. A lot of these houses that we redo kind of built in the 90s, and they all had built-in desks. Like, how many have you worked in a kitchen with like a built-in desk that nobody uses, and just kind of left the junk space in the kitchen? And with people living at home, we're trying to reuse these spaces. So we've really kind of reorganized that to being wet bars. Here's an example of one up here. This used to be a desk at the end of the kitchen, and we just made it kind of a cool, edgy wet bar that he's at home. He's with his friends now. He's not going out as much, and this is what he wanted. So, with wet bars, you can add a lot of really cool lighting. I know Peggy talked about that as well. But integrated lighting, I asked Rod Hunter from Woodmode earlier, what percentage of designers who order from Woodmode are putting integrated lighting into cabinets? He said 7%. I was shocked. It is such an easy thing to do, and it adds so much value. This particular one, not only did we route in for task lighting underneath, but in the shelves we put in up lighting to really kind of illuminate, and they're switched separately. So at night you could dim down and just leave that soft glow, kind of a nice gastropub look, I guess. Coffee bars too. I'm from the Northwest, so coffee's big up there. I've been doing a lot of built-in coffee bars for people. I don't know if you guys are experiencing that as well. Texture. So, you know, everybody knows color, everyone knows shape, but textures become a big thing. In rugs, there's lots of different textures as you'll walk through the mart here and see texture in rugs and flooring, texture in wall coverings. Flocked wall coverings have been a great way that I've found to really add punch to rooms. Also texture in tiles and artistic tiles right around the corner. They have a ton of these as well, but not just doing marble tile anymore, but how do I get texture out of that tile? It's not, because then you don't need all that punch of color. Just bring in texture. Great way to create some wow factor. Color saturation. I know Pam talked about that. That's a big deal. Dark colors, heavy saturation, matte finishes. I'm seeing a lot of that. That's what's working for us up there. So that's what I had for cool fixtures.
So anybody who can incorporate gastropub into their presentation, I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
Just letting you know that.
Yeah.
My question to you is, okay, so do you bring the wow to them or do they bring it to you? And how do you know when not to push it too far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most people come in with an idea of what they want, but they don't really know what's out there. We're so exposed to even this mart, like what is there out there? And then when you can show that to them and get them to step out of their box, not off the cliff, but out of the box, I think that's where you're really going to succeed, because if they wanted to stay in the box, they don't really need you. So get them to step out of the box, and that's where we're finding it.
Good point. Okay, now we're going to go on to regional. Steve, I think you're up first with Chicagoland. I'm going to click it to the next one if you don't mind. Regional. We're now going to go to regional trends. So I think first, Chicagoland.
So yes, I am a kitchen designer. From those other photos you saw, you're like, this guy doesn't do kitchens, right? So mixing metals is huge right now. I don't know how many of you have seen that. In this particular kitchen, we've mixed brushed brass, stainless steel, polished nickel, and 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that was completely unheard of. The other thing that we're seeing here locally, I know they talked a lot about color saturation and adding colors in green is reflecting of nature. But what we're seeing a lot of is that a creamier white, Benjamin Moore's Plaster of Paris, is one of our biggest sellers today because it's taking the place of a bright white. But tend to want things to be softer, a little more mellow, and that's what we're finding.
Part of the things that I think from this pandemic is that people are wanting their zen place, their private place. And so with this particular client, they wanted to start their day off with their coffee together and kind of just reflecting on the days before, but they didn't want to have it in that typical breakfast nook. They wanted a very comfortable place. So I think I've been getting a lot of that. And also the warmer tones. I think people are kind of getting tired of white kitchen, white walls, and white everything. So But then they're too afraid to get out of that because they're thinking resale value, what's going to happen if I go outside of the trend? And so what is so easy about introducing another color is introducing the warmer tones like the rift cut oak that we're seeing today. Actually, I had one here before, but you'll see I believe it's going to be trending as well. And also exotic focal points. So there's always that one wow factor, right, Brian?
Yep.
And in the kitchen, the best place to put it, at least for easy cleaning, is the backsplash for this particular one anyways. And I shouldn't do this, but I do have a go-to design solution for something like that. And then the color green, I think we're gonna see that a lot, because it's such a soothing color, and it does, it's the most dominant color in nature, right? And it just I guess exudes just calmness, serenity, and all the good stuff that you want to feel when you get home. And that's about it.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to take this from you. Okay, of course you're the South. Here we go. What's going on in the South?
Classic contemporary, modern but not minimalist. So it's classic contemporary with an edge, some kind of a special focal point. And this kitchen, which was finished recently, we'll see some other pictures of it where this gold bronze detail is on the edges of those open shelves, and along inside the door trim. I think I mentioned that before. And in fact, the photo of that cologne door that you showed is exactly the door that I have in mind as trending. It's a kind of like a slab door with a narrow raised edge all the way around the edge of the doors and the drawers. The gold bronze detail, it's on the shelf up there, and you can barely see that along the inside panels of the drawer heads and the panels. And then a place for everything, and everything in its place, and lit, of course, so that you can not only get the drawer open all the way, but you can see everything that's in there. And then I don't have the word exotic up here, but there's exactly what I have in mind. I believe that our market, which is generally the luxury market, they don't want anything that anybody else has exactly the same. And it's the same stuff, so you got to figure out some way to use it differently. But natural wood and natural stone, every piece is never going to be the same, so that's kind of the go-to. But what we're seeing is wood, maybe with a live edge, or really unusual graining or texture to it, something that makes it different. And the same thing with the stones, something that's really unusual and different edge, different shape, something really unusual about it. And non-slip floors. And the hotel that I'm staying in, a lot of the surfaces are very shiny, but they are non-slip. I'm even testing it. I'm rubbing it to make sure it isn't, because it looks very shiny. So, so if you don't want the matte and you like the shiny, it doesn't have to be. So this is my Southern Lady in Alaska, the kitchen, and it was designed for someone with a progressive disability. Raised dishwasher, which you can't see behind the flowers there, and a microwave at easy level to breathe. All drawers, we don't ever do an ordinary cabinet knife. You would pull out, so I open a door and open a drawer, close a drawer, close a door. And then I like the quote from Steve Jobs. It says, "Design is not just what it looks and feels like, it's how it works."
Okay, before we go to the West Coast, I just want to ask, because we had a little discussion about, you probably know, open shelving. So I keep referring to you, but I want to ask you, who is pro open shelving? Raise your hand. A little bit, okay. Who is against open shelving? Raise your hand. Yes. I'm just wondering, because we had a little bit of a discussion about it.
Yeah, well, we've had this thing going back and forth. I think it's great for display. I think it's lousy for storage. So it would display, put your storage things in a shallow tall cabinet.
Give me a on the spot, West Coast.
Well, in the defense of that, some kitchens are so big that you need more negative space. And I think rather than just crowding it with tons of open cabinetry or upper cabinetry, you need to find a place to kind of get some negative space in the uppers. But moving on to the West Coast, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. We see a lot of light stain tones. And Wood Mode has a bunch of great ones. Matte Shale happens to be my favorite. If you haven't seen it, you can see it here in the showroom. And it's funny because in the Northwest, you would think, well, why do people want gray stains? And I think it boils down to they don't want red anymore. Those red wood tones, I think, have left the building. So light stain tones is what we're seeing. Wood grain, the rift cuts, especially in emphasizing it. Going back to this one with black highlights, this is a rift grain or a rift cut with black highlights. And I think just emphasizing, if you're going to do the linear grain, emphasize it. It's a cool way to do it. Smaller rails and styles. You know, that should have been a national trend because everybody said that, I think, up here. But we're seeing that as well, smaller rails and styles on doors. Metal integration. So integrating into doors, like hardware that's actually routed into doors. We're doing a lot of that. I did talk to Wood Mode, and potentially they're going to work out a program where they're going to start doing that too. So really excited for that. Modern mountain look. The thing I would say about that is cozy. People want a very cool, chic, cozy place, and that's definitely what's going on the West Coast.
All right, that's great. Thank you all. So now we're going to open it up for questions. What I'd ask is that if you have a question, could you raise your hand, and I'll point to, and then you can stand up and repeat your question loud. I don't want to pass it on the mic. So any questions? Yes.
For surfaces, do you think you'll see more of a pivot from polished countertop to home?
I'll answer that. Absolutely. That's what we're seeing today.
Anybody else want to? Okay. That finished, right? Okay. Any other questions? No questions? We all just want to drink, is that it?
I have a quick question. How many are students and how many are actual kitchen designers or interior designers here today? So one at a time. How many students? Everyone's a pro. Okay. Interior designer? Nice. Okay, I'll give you my card later. We can do some business. Sorry, guys.
Any other questions from the panel?
Kitchen design.
Anybody? Peggy, did you have a question?
People who didn't raise their hand at all. Other trades, at least in building trade or some other. You didn't raise your hand. You're pressed. Okay. Okay.
Just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to our panel. I think they were great. Rose, Steve, Brian, and Peggy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pamela Jaccarino, Editor-in-Chief of Luxe Interiors and Design. Welcome to Masterclass. Today, I'm thrilled to speak with designer Melanie Turner, who artfully combines cultures, styles, colors, and eras to produce refined yet livable spaces. Please welcome award-winning designer Melanie Turner. So Melanie, it's so great to be with you today. And I want to just kick things off by congratulating you and your team because your project was chosen for our September-October cover of Luxe. I know this is airing a little bit later, but congratulations. It was an amazing project.
Oh my gosh, it was like dream come true. I have been wanting to be in Luxe forever, and to make the cover was just like, all my dreams came true. I couldn't believe it.
So this is a master class in which, we like to ask how you become the famous and wonderful designer that you are. And so I want to take it all the way back, right? You're originally from Wales.
Yes.
You came to the States at a young age and settled in Florida, and then went to college in Georgia to study design. You live in Atlanta. And it's interesting. I'm always interested in sort of people's backgrounds and how that gets imprinted a bit into their design style. And if you look closely at your work, there's sort of nods to those places in your projects. Can you talk a little bit about how that experience of growing up in all of those areas sort of shape you and your design aesthetic?
Yes, you never realize at the time. You tend to, as an adult, think of like, oh my gosh, this is the way I lived as a kid, but it does form you. And I always wanted the sofa and 2 end tables that matched. And I grew up in a very bohemian kind of home where there was huge Coca-Cola, pop art, and Warhol, and funky stuff that I was just dying of embarrassment. But now it's ingrained in me. I was fortunate to have grown up in Florida and California, so I kind of have a very casual and yet effortless, easy lifestyle about the spaces. Even if there are city homes and they're more formal, there's something that makes you want to walk in and enjoy the space. And also, of course, just being around lots of art growing up, so that influenced me. But for the most part, I would say California and Florida, huge influence.
That's interesting to me, just as an observer of your work too, because there's so much classic design in your work. It definitely has that sort of relaxed feel, but it also, there's a sophistication to it as well.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
How did you even get into design? Like, do you go to school to design? Is this something that you're like, I have a passion for design? Or talk a little bit about that. How you got into this profession?
Well, like if you're a creative person and you're an artist in your soul, it's just a matter of what direction you go into. And I mean, as a little girl, I would walk into rooms and just turn to my mom and say, oh my gosh, they need to get rid of their pillows, like really young, or building tree houses or forts and bushes, like all those things. And my parents were great about giving me the creativity to do my own space. So I just think it's innate. And then fortunately, I was young enough to know that that's what I wanted to do as a career, and, went to college and got in my car the day after high school and drove to Atlanta to go to school here. So
that's amazing. We're going to fast forward a bit, right? You're in Wales, you're in Florida, you're in Georgia, you're in California, all of this gets digested. And you began designing interiors for homes that your husband constructed, including your own home. On a dare from your husband, you entered a design contest that won you the top residential prize and ended up with you being on the cover. Can you talk a little bit about, that defining moment, and also, where did your passion come from to want to get into design in the first place?
It was during the real estate recession. Everybody was going bust. And my husband being a developer, all I was looking at was just trying to sell his home. So I was doing the interiors, the magazines were picking them up. So I didn't realize the silver lining through all this was I was building a portfolio. So I had a portfolio and he dared me, like you said, and I won the Southeast Designer of the Year award. Both happened and nobody even knew who I was because I was using my maiden name, Melanie Turner. So it was like, okay, you win the crown, but everybody goes back into their holes. And it's like, what do I do with this? So I decided that I wanted to be on the cover of a magazine. So I had hundreds of photographs of a project, actually my own personal home. And I took the dining room, and then this sounds crazy, but I was so naive. I didn't even realize the header on the magazines come in different colors. I cut a veranda one, which happened to be in a bright green, put it on a bulletin board in my room. And all I had literally was a folding table and a computer. That was it, in a 5 by 10 space. And every day I would look at it and be like, that's what's going to happen. And lo and behold, there's a little bit of story in between there, but it ended up making the cover. And when I opened the middle, they used to actually, before everybody was sending it via computers, you would get it in the mail first and not tell you who was on the cover. And there it was on the cover. And I put it next to the magazine. And I think you have a photograph of it. It's exactly the same color header, the same photograph, everything. So
talk about that.
Yeah.
That's definitely an infomercial for the laws of attraction, for sure.
Oh my gosh. I mean, anybody who doesn't believe in it, I don't know how it happened, but I mean, even in my office, it was just crazy. So that was the total shift where, okay, this is supposed to happen. So yes, it was exciting.
Let's talk a little bit about your work, which, feels very powerful, edited, very intentional. I love that you have referenced John Saladino, the great John Saladino, as a source of design inspiration in your own work. Talk a little bit about, obviously you're working for clients, as every designer is out to, create a home for their clients. But I think also every designer has sort of their style and type of interior work that just gets you excited. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And why John Saladino? Or why not John Saladino?
Yeah, that's the question, right? He's amazing. I was fortunately, after winning that Southeast Designer of the Year award, I was next door. My office is next door to ADAC, which is Atlanta Decorative Arts Center. And I was parking, and there he sat by himself, all by himself. And I was, walked up and sat and talked with him. So it was just amazing that happened. But anyway, well, basically I look at I try to decide, like, what is our design? Because if you look in our book, it's a lot of different styles based in classicism, like you said. But overall, if I was to give a defining look for us, it would be very whimsical. I don't think I take design too seriously. I think life is serious enough. So it's whimsical and it's creative. And at the same time, it's very fresh and edited, taking what's steeped in classicalness and then adding color or no color, but just simplifying it. And as far as like what gets me excited these days, I think I always love good architecture. I mean, if you start with a beautiful canvas, the work is almost done for you. But if I could ask for anything, it's a decisive client. I think that's, I used to ask for big projects. I used to ask for money. I used to ask for creativity. Now I just want decisiveness, because it's almost like you have to get out of your own way as the client, and let the professionals really hold your hand. But that would be what
to make that whimsical, magical interior, come across for sure.
Yes.
I want to talk about your book.
Age helps too, because you have the ability to be able to be like, okay, if you want to go that way, but that's not what I would do. Where I would never say that when I was younger, ever. So
that's also, it's I feel with age sometimes comes hopefully confidence to be able to say what you mean and mean what you say.
Absolutely.
This past year, congratulations, your first book, Inviting Interiors, A Fresh Take on Beautiful Rooms, came out. Please hold it up for everyone to see.
Thank you.
It's also, it's such a great cover and a beautiful read. It emphasizes creating understated yet elegant and timeless spaces, using balance and light and scale and color, which are sort of the amazing tools of the design trade. What was it like for you to see your book, like, have it all come together? And, talk a little bit about what that was like for you as a designer to see sort of your magnus opus come together and be packaged so beautifully.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it was quite unexpected. I had been waiting for years. I'm not the type of person who just obviously or noticeably just jumps in and just like, yeah, I'm ready for this, because I think it's a building pattern. And, everyone says, oh, you're an overnight success. No, it takes years for anybody to really be creative and get what their style is and build up a business. So I didn't think I was ready. And I reached out to Joe Cohen, that we know. And I just was like, hey, when you're in town, can you come talk with me? And I really just wanted to do it on my house, which is a 100-year-old Italian house, because I feel like the steward and the keeper of it, and wanted to be able to have a book on the house. So that's what it was about. And she just is like, no. And I was like, she said, I want to do it on you. And I was like, what? And she just is like, you have this breadth of work. I didn't think we had enough. So honestly, the feeling was surreal and surprise.
I feel like you probably have a second book. And if so, what would your second book be about?
Yes. So it's going to be about my house, which is a 1923 16th century Italian Baroque house. And another project I'm doing in Miami, which is a 100-year-old house on the waterway, was the same. That's my goal. So everyone, law of attraction, put it out there.
You know, Melanie, in previous interviews, you've spoken a lot about your bold decision making. Where does this talk about and a confidence, right? Where does that confidence come from? And for other designers that are watching and design enthusiasts, can you talk a little bit about how you take that confidence and your energy and sort of apply it to your life and your work?
Yes. Well, I think confidence really comes from being loved. And I was fortunate to have a dad who raised me to tell me I could do anything I wanted to do except be president of the United States, because I wasn't born here. That was the only thing I couldn't do. But other than that, it was just, I think that's where it boils down to, is just being loved. But even then, also, I think confidence comes from helping others. So if you give things away, if you give design away, if you mentor like the designers in my office, if you're just constantly giving, it just comes back to you and makes you feel good. There's also no rules in design. Like if you love something and it really moves you, there's who wrote the rule that you have to do certain things a certain way? My biggest problem is people don't want to be different anymore. When I was growing up, there were always characters. Like, I love New Orleans because it's gritty and you can be who you want to be. Like, everybody is just the same. And so it's like, you don't have to do white kitchens and neutral sofas, because it's going to have to last you 10 or 15 years with a product that will be here thousands of years because on your sofa, because you don't want to get it dirty. Like, no, go ahead and live your life. If you want to put a blanket on your sofa for the winter and take it off, do whatever you want to do. Just don't be afraid. There is no mistakes. I have a retail space, and that being said, it's a different buyer to be able to put something in a store that's not as high a quality as designers, because we're like your gate to the world and being able to resource and find things and travel. And I bring things back from Italy or Mexico all the time, not knowing where it's going to go. But I think you just go start educating yourself, go to museums, go to flea markets, go to antique shows, and just walk and see what you like and start your own collection.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Before I let you go, I want to launch into a few fun rapid fires for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. What would you splurge on if you had an additional, I'm going to make it $75,000. We're not going to go millions. We're going to sort of what are you buying?
Well, that's given that I've already given my money away and, done all those things to make you feel good. I would say that it would probably be maybe towards my second book or a piece of art, because art makes the difference. Those would be the two. And I like supporting artists.
Great. What is your favorite style or moment in design?
Deco. I like deco a lot because I think it goes all ways.
Yeah, I feel like deco has influenced so many styles and people.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Word association. First word that comes to mind when you think of Wales.
Oh, a couple words. Dragon, green, family.
California.
Light.
Atlanta.
Trees and beautiful architecture.
You do have great architecture in Atlanta. Which designer, dead or alive, would you take to dinner so that you can chat with them about design and art and everything else that you love?
I don't know if I could think of one, but they're in the same time period. So I'd say Billy Baldwin and Halston, and we would go to dinner and then we'd go to Studio 54.
I would like to come, and I think my +1 should be John Saladino.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we'd have so much fun. Yes. John would really have it. Done. I love that. That's great. Yes. I'm gonna be like Bianca and riding a horse,
I will have to figure out what my entrance will be. What is the one thing that you will always find in a Melanie Turner project?
I would say fantastic art, because art makes the difference. Everybody can buy the same sofa, but for the most part, people don't buy the same art. So I would say definitely good art.
Thanks so much for being part of Design TV today. It's so great to chat with you.
It was great. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar, How to Build a Sound Strategy. Today's webinar is being presented in partnership with TURF, and I'm going to be your host, Avi Rajagopal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Metropolis. You know, pre-pandemic, noise was one of the biggest complaints that most designers got for interior spaces, especially in workplaces. And you know, as the ways that we work, as the ways that we engage with the built environment have shifted around and changed, I think our relationship to sound and noise has shifted too. We are currently balancing, virtual experiences, in-person experiences, outdoor experiences that are not always optimized for the best sound. Sound is also something that is, straddles, as all our senses do, the lines between the physiological and the cultural. And so, different folks have different preferences, desires, comfort levels with sound. And we come with a variety of needs and wants when it comes to spaces that really support us. So how do we utilize sound as a tool in creating safe and supportive spaces? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I have a fantastic group of panelists here to join me to talk about that. We have with us Robbie Eliezer, who's the design director at Trahan Architects. Robbie, thanks so much for joining us today. Also with us is Carolyn Ames Noble, who's the founder and director of design at Ames Design Collective. Carolyn, such a pleasure to have you. We have Raj Patel, who's an Arup Fellow and the CEO of Acorn Technology Systems. Raj, thank you so much for joining me. And we have also with us Ben Hamlin, who is a former director of inclusive design at Microsoft, and of course, now is working on a variety of design projects. Ben, such a pleasure to have you join us today. Raj, why don't we start with you? Last year, at the start of last year, you had a book published, Architectural Acoustics, A Guide to Integrated Thinking. And you've consulted on acoustics with some of the biggest architectural projects in the world. Can you tell us the role that acoustics plays within the broader design strategy for those projects?
Sure, Avi, thanks. I think it should play an important role on every project, but it doesn't, and it hasn't always done so either. I think in the past, many design processes were geared and informed by what we see. Everybody's very used to looking at drawings and more recently renderings and so on. And many people probably mistakenly think that our experience of the built environment is mainly driven by what we see. But actually our experiences in the built environment are driven by all of our senses. And really good design would engage all of our senses really well in terms of sort of universal design principles. And to be effective, that needs to be thought about from the very beginning of a project. On projects like concert halls or recording studios, it's usually, hopefully, thought out usually before the project has even started. It forms a fundamental part of the brief in thinking about the project itself. But there are many, many projects where the traditional old-fashioned way of designing, approaching, you employ an architect first, a structural engineer second, then you get around to your mechanical and electrical systems, and then maybe a lighting consultant and an acoustic consultant. As that process is still all too common. Sound is obviously really fundamentally important to our health, to our well-being, to our safety, and amongst other things, should be better considered from the outset of doing any design process. The reason for writing the book was it's not a technical book about acoustics, although it has lots of project examples in it. It's really a book about how to design well for sound and how to think about that from the very outset of a project and make it accessible for designers of any type, really, to understand the process. I will say that the one big step change that's occurred over the last few years is that the process called oralization, which is the ability to, it's the oral equivalent of a visualization, the ability to listen to a building before it's built, has become more and more accessible. In my work at Arup, we pioneered that tool 20 years ago and have continued to develop it. And over the next few years, I think it will become more and more prevalent. So the ability to listen to design, I think, is creating a step change in how people think about it and consider it in the early stages of a project. But I think there's a much greater general awareness, as you quite rightly note. People have been stuck at homes, people have been stuck in different places when they've been working during the pandemic. The concept, the impact of how sound really affects you and your environment and how you work every day and everything that you do really is becoming, people are becoming more and more aware of it and more considerate of it in the design process. So we're certainly seeing an uptick in how people are thinking about it. And of course, on the biggest, most prestigious projects, it's thought about from the outset. Big public projects as well, people where there are large numbers of people in a particular type of building, from a safety perspective and from a functional perspective, it's thought about. But it should be thought about in everything.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Raj. I think you bring up a couple of things here. First of all, as the title of your book says, it's a guide to integrated thinking, and I think integrating that acoustics right from the start is so important. I think the other thing underlying what you're saying is, how do we make acoustics part of everyday, so to speak, design practice, right? How does it start to inform every project, and how does it start to do that at the beginning of projects? And I'm sure we're going to dive a little deeper into how do we sort of oralize, how do we listen to buildings and how do we listen to projects in just a little bit. And Raj, I'm sure we want to hear more about that, because I think that is a concept that is still 20 years later, still new to folks. And so we should talk about that some more, but that's a great introduction. And I see that at least some of you know that we are open for questions throughout today's discussion. Trevor, thank you so much for jumping right in. Everybody follow Trevor's example. The moment you have a thought or a comment or a response to something one of our panelists is saying, or a question that you may have for them, please go ahead and put it in Q&A. Don't lose it. You don't need to wait. And we will start to take your prompts and your questions in just a few minutes here. Robbie, I'd like to come to you next. Raj talked about how acoustics is sometimes an obvious part of projects like concert halls or venues. And you worked on a project like that, the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, where you took a really innovative approach to the acoustics. Those kinds of projects often tend to be testing ground or tend to generate insights, hopefully, that can start to influence other types of work or other types of projects as well. So I'd love to hear, how you approached the Alliance Theater project and, how your work on the theater kind of dovetails with some of your other spaces, cultural spaces, outdoor spaces that Rehan is working on, where sound is obviously such a key part of people's spatial experience.
Thanks, Abby. That's a great question. So the Alliance Theater was an interesting project because it was a gut renovation, a transformation of an existing theater. The Alliance was not well served by their old space. They hadn't had a meaningful new facility in 50 years. So we really had a kind of a low bar to judge against. But we also had a kind of a cultural society in Atlanta that we were designing in. So, in the days of segregation, many patrons were relegated to the balcony. So we heard painful stories from the community about what that was like to come to shows and not be able to sit in the main audience. And so the first thing that we did on the Alliance Theater was kind of question the role of the balcony in the theater. So it's iconic in that all the circulation occurs in the hall. So instead of having a kind of outer lobby and you pop into a box or pop into a balcony or pop into a parterre, there's this kind of interior promenade of ramps and stairs that are fully within the room. And it kind of cascades between the balcony and the orchestra. So if you're in a private box, you're actually on that shared pathway. You don't take a separate entrance. You don't have a special door. And same thing if you're in, let's say, a more affordable ticket, you take the same route to your seat. So the first thing we did in the Alliance Theater was kind of try to challenge those notions of segregation that existed historically in theaters. And that's where we got the plan and that very iconic cascade that defines the room, that kind of warm embrace. Another thing that we felt really strongly about is kind of inducing a highly concave plan, which Raj, I'm sure you would know, caused all kinds of issues with us in terms of sound focusing geometries. So the room's incredibly sound focusing, and it's also a bit wider than you need for a spoken word room because we brought that circulation interior. So we kind of induced in the plan two issues acoustically, extreme concavity and width. And we had to overcome that with the acoustics and with the materiality of the room. So kind of co-evolving from challenging the planning of the room and creating the cascade, we had to embark on a kind of an experimental research project to kind of solve those acoustical phenomenon. I could probably talk for 2 hours on it. I have before, but I'll tell kind of one example of how we kind of overcame those issues. The first thing that Trey Trahan, the founder of our firm, and I said is like, how are we going to build these shapes? They're curvaceous and they're complex. And we didn't want to repeat the mistakes we had done in the past projects where we had on the Louisiana State Museum, carved thousands of molds and cast stone into them and discarded those molds. So we wanted a system that wasn't very wasteful. And one night, in kind of an epiphany, Trey texted me, "Have you seen this sculptor, Matthias Pliesnig?" And I was very familiar with his work. He happens to be in Brooklyn, about 30 minutes from our studio. And so Trey and I showed up at Matthias's office one day and we said, we think the steam bending technique could be used at the scale of the room. I mean, it was that crazy. And so we hired Matthias and we built 13 full-scale mock-ups of various pieces in the room to test how that wood lattice work could solve the geometry problems, but also solve the acoustics. So on the balcony front specifically, we did two things. One, we developed a kind of sinusoidal profile that is swept across the face of the balcony, and it alternates between closed and porous. And so those two features, the sinusoidal geometry and plan and section, and the pattern of solid and void, actually overcomes a lot of the sound reflections from the stage on that highly curved front balcony piece, but all with one material system. All of it is through wood and through the geometry of that shaping. And as that balcony sweeps across, it actually then transitions into an area that's non-performative, just an open lattice millwork. So I think that's the most key thing about the Alliance Theater that I think is so special about it is the millwork is performative in some areas through analysis and shaping, and then other areas is purely experiential. And it's kind of doing both of those things. It's the finish, it's the tactile experience, and it's that kind of way that we overcame some of those acoustic challenges. And so we learned a lot of lessons about acoustics on the Alliance Theater for sure. But one of our takeaways was it is kind of fun to collaborate with acousticians when we do things that are antithetical that we know are going to cause issues that are going to force us to innovate. So I'll tell two quick project stories that are lessons learned. One, we're doing a little amphitheater in Arkansas for Luther George Park. Lead landscape architects are Spackman, Mossett, Michaels, and it's for the Walton Family Foundation. So they had a really simple brief, make a kind of iconic sculptural pavilion that could be dual functional. And we had this crazy idea that can maybe be two-sided and host movies off one side and concerts off the other. So it's kind of an open air pavilion with no backstage house. It's almost like a picture frame in the landscape. But we wanted it to be like a rolling hill in the garden to kind of pick up on the forms of the park. And so as we were doing the analysis, we had this very tall, deeply concave shape. And we were working with Threshold Acoustics, and they did a bunch of really beautiful animations for us that showed that the shape was really working against us in the AV sound system. And we were also up against a massive VE on the project. And so I called Robin Glostermeyer, partner there, and said, how are we going to fix this? And she said, well, I have an idea, which is your shape's really bad and you're over budget. So she sent me a sketch of kind of flattening out some of the curvature, but in a very specific way. And I regenerated the whole design, we retested it, and voila, we kind of solved the acoustics with that and cut the steel area in almost half. So that was a really beautiful example of how partnering with an acoustician, you can not only make the project sound great, but you can sometimes achieve your budget and kind of solve other problems too. And the last story I'll tell is we're working on a chapel in New Orleans, and it's a spoken word chapel for the Jesuit community down there. It's a pretty small room, maybe 200 seats. And so all the lessons we learned about equity on the Alliance Theater, we kind of took to the extreme on this project. Every room is a circle. And so it's these series of drums and plan that interlock and work together. And the acoustics are really challenging in a circular room. And so not in a similar way, we've kind of impregnating the project with this very antithetical geometry, the circle, which doesn't want to work for spoken word acoustics, but we're solving it with other ways. So we're exploring 3D printing the interior surfaces of that room with a set of scallop patterns that create a highly diffusive pattern, but it's incredibly beautiful. And it augments the architecture, it augments the embrace of the circle, and it's differential based on where we need the relief and where we don't. As it goes up the walls, it kind of opens up like a sponge and becomes more absorptive. So these stories are really fun because there are threads between the projects. We often start with that big idea about bringing people together and acknowledge the problems we're about to cause with things like acoustics, but we bring our acousticians in very early and we partner with them and they challenge us and we try to integrate their ideas early on. And in the end result is projects that perform really, really well for acoustics, which ultimately makes people feel like they belong in a space. There's nothing more disorienting than going to a space where you don't feel like you belong, and acoustics are a huge part of that.
Thank you so much for that, Robbie. It's really wonderful how the acoustic strategy is so integrated into the very fabric of the space, and how in all three cases, in the Alliance Theater, in the park project as well as the chapel, it sounds like material solutions were such a big part of that, and really pushing forward in terms of material capabilities was so important to achieving some of that acoustic performance. And I think that's a really, you said it, often paying attention to acoustics can result in sort of multiplying benefits across a project, maybe even in terms of budget. And so really looking at acoustics as one factor within all of the other factors in the project, but early, as Raj pointed out, is really, really important. I also love that in all three projects, it seems like the acoustic strategy really was so tied to the values of the project, which were essentially about equity and openness and inclusion. And you brought that up right at the end. It's so important. And thinking about sound as a tool to create an equitable and a good experience for everyone who encounters the places we design is absolutely key, which is a cue for Ben. Ben, can you tell us about your work with inclusive design at Microsoft, and particularly what role has sound played within that? Now, often, of course, you're looking at virtual spaces as much as you're looking at physical experience. And I think some of your experience in that area especially is important as we try and bridge those experiences now, in a COVID-informed world. Yeah. So how do we look at sound, and how can we leverage sound when we want to be accessible and inclusive with our work?
We think of sound in the same way we think about any other mechanism of input. Like, we have the luxury of being able to use keyboards. We have the luxury of being able to use our voice. We have the luxury of having a variety of different tools in which to be able to interact with computers. And one of the questions that I to this day, I still think it's one of the most important questions you can ask in any design project. And it's important to ask it not just at the beginning, but throughout the life cycle of the design project, which is, who are we unintentionally excluding from participating? Because one of the things you begin to realize is that no matter how great a designer you are, no matter what your medium for design is, there is always someone that is unintentionally excluded. It's part of this notion of, I will always design a set of products or a set of services or solutions that are largely based on my lived experience. And so the role of designing products, whether it be acoustic products, whether it be other forms of input, is really about ensuring that the people that you've got in the room providing you with input feel like they're a perfect, diverse representation of the customers that you aim to serve, and not necessarily the people that designed it. So that becomes really important. And I mean, just to give you a really super quick example, I think COVID has provided, frankly, a pretty fascinating example, and it's helped us, I think it's helped us recognize that there are a lot of product and service gaps in a lot of the products we have. I mean, if you just take something really simple that we do every single day, like meetings, all of a sudden, everyone's now, especially if you're working in an information-based business, everyone is sent home and they're now working from home. And this, in essence, becomes the meeting room. And when everyone's dialing into the meeting, it actually forces all of us actually to communicate very, very differently. And it also forces us, perhaps more importantly, to listen differently as well. On one hand, we're able to, I think, kind of almost deconstruct this sort of in-room, out-room dynamic that exists when you've got a bunch of people that have historically joined a meeting from a conference room and the people that are then joining from home. Often the people that are joining remotely tend to be passively involved in that meeting. And now all of a sudden you're creating equity because of what's happened with a global pandemic that allows everyone to feel like they're actually now on a relatively level playing field. But again, I go back to this question, who is unintentionally excluded from participating in these kinds of meetings? And when you think about someone who's deaf, as an example, the simple cognitive load that comes from listening and communicating in new ways has created new challenges for all of us. We often talk about this idea of Zoom fatigue, right? But for people with disabilities, people who are deaf in particular, those challenges are even more acute. But in essence, what we're doing is we sort of think about design, whether it be for acoustics or any other dimension of building products for a relatively diverse group of people. It's about, in essence, mismatching or identifying where those human interactions are being mismatched. And it can be done from a variety of different places, whether it's from your ability to touch, your ability to be able to see, the ability to be able to hear, the ability to be able to speak. And increasingly, I think, as we've gone through this pandemic, the ability to be able to feel, the role of mental health as we sort of think about building products that are genuinely inclusive, I think becomes really important too. So that question, and that question asked many, many times over throughout that design process, who am I unintentionally excluding, ends up becoming an incredible question, not just to ensure that we're building inclusive products, but more importantly, it actually opens up or unlocks an opportunity to innovate in ways that we perhaps didn't see.
Yeah, absolutely. We often, as designers, talk about user-centered design. We talk about user experience, but of course, all of those, the validity of any of those concepts depends on how one defines users. And the moment you're starting to define groups, of course, you're including and excluding. And I love what you said, Ben, about asking.
I will say that there's only two industries in the world that talk about users, and that's technology and drug dealers. They tend to be people, and I think we've got to continually remind ourselves that these are real people; they're not actually users.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, right? It's also what is our mindset when we think about when we're talking about interior design, we often talk about occupants when we or when we talk about architecture, and again, that can be a term that is both can be as inclusive or as exclusive, because we're often trying to define that first as we start to define spaces. And in that very act, we've set up some barriers. And I think, talking about sound as part of that is really important. Again, within design, we tend to privilege the visual senses, whether that's in graphic design or or it's in interior design or in architecture, and starting to think about access, not just in terms of visuals or in terms of mobility, but also in terms of sound is really important. And we'll dig a little bit further into how do we look at different auditory needs and how do we look at sort of overstimulation and understimulation in just a few minutes here. But thank you so much for that, Ben. Carolyn, I'd love to bring you in hot on the heels of that. We've talked about acoustics being an integrated or integral part of the design process and why that's important. We've talked about the advantages that can offer, but also that it allows us to use acoustics as a tool for inclusivity. And Ben has spoken about, how do we create equitable experiences and how do we look at sound as part of that. Your own work, some of your research, at least from recent times, is focused on the connections between sound and other sensory elements in space, like color, for example, and how we leverage those to create spaces that are healthy and supportive. Can you talk about some of those connections? Can you talk about your more recent research work, and how do we place sound among all the other things we might consider as interior designers?
Yes, thank you so much, Avi. Thanks for having me today. To your point, I've been involved with extensive research with Turf Design, and Turf, of course, creates acoustic products. But what is so interesting about this team is they're really interested in the environmental design. They're really interested in the health and the well-being attributes. And we all have had our own experiences through this pandemic. Ben, by the way, I really appreciate what you shared about Zoom. As a working mother, a lot of us have actually felt like we've had a larger voice and a seat at the table through this on-screen platform. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Another thing that we realized through our experience, again, working with Turf, we had this experience that was so digital, and we started to wonder when we would re-engage our spaces, what that might feel like. And that's when we really started to go down this path of sensory design discovery, thinking about the integration of our senses. For example, we often think of smell and taste. It would be really challenging to really enjoy that meal with only one or the other. And so when you think about sensory integration in our spaces that are very primarily sight-driven, when we start to unlock and provide sensory discovery for all individuals, you start to really include everyone. For example, we all process our senses differently. We all integrate our senses differently. As designers, there is no way we'll be able to help somebody's sensory integration. But what we can do is take away the barriers that might block it. Example, I think color and sound is really interesting because you would think to yourself, how are those two things connected? I see Ben nodding his head enthusiastically. They are so interconnected. When you think of perhaps somebody who might be hyposensitive and really needs maybe a more calm current, maybe sound that has increased NRC. So Well Building Institute, just providing some real-time strategies, they look at a 0.7 in those spaces. So 70% of that sound is getting absorbed. So you have that really nice distilled sound, and color can really support that as well. Think about a soft, diffuse grade blue, for example, and how calming and also creative that color can be. Conversely, maybe you're someone that's hypersensitive and you actually need that stimulation. You're the person that needs that extra cup of coffee in the morning. And perhaps you're an individual that actually really starts to, crave music and sound, and bold color can do that same sort of stimulation. So when they're used together, and then you thread in something like smell. So think about smell from a product standpoint, eliminating the VOCs makes sense. When you think about tactility, Robbie's example of the wood was was so just fitting. Thinking of wood look textures and the way that that can also feel very biophilic. Now you're starting to thread across the senses and you're helping support someone's experience in a space. And what I find so interesting about this research about sensorial design, it really does start to have, and again, I appreciate what Ben said about unintentionally leaving someone out. But we found in this discovery that maybe we're bringing more people into our conversation. I think back to ADA. ADA, of course, it was in 1990, and you started the grab bar, for example. The grab bar, how many of you use the grab bar whenever you're in a public space? I know I do. While that made somebody's ability and their opportunity in the space more equitable, what it did is it actually elevated the design for all of us. So when I see sensory design in our spaces and thinking about acoustic comfort or a color palette or providing user choice in the way we engage and use our spaces, I think that we're actually enhancing the design for everyone.
Absolutely, Carolyn. And, that's, I think, the dream of, Raj started us off talking about universal design principles. I think that's the dream, is that, that we'll be able to in including people, in intentionally including, as opposed to unintentionally excluding, that we might have some of those multiplying benefits, some of those benefits that are, kind of hidden, unintended, for all of us. And I think that's really the hope here. I also really love what you said about using sound in conjunction with other elements, color, materiality, and so on. And we'll dig a little deeper into that. Maybe we should just take a couple of the questions here from our audience. And folks, if you have any other comments or questions, please go ahead and put them in, and start to talk about how do we prototype, how do we test currently acoustic solutions. Robbie, you spoke a little bit about this. Raj, you were talking about the oralization concept. Maybe Raj, you want to start us off talking about, what are some best practices now in terms of testing for acoustics, and how can it become more integrated into the design process as as part of our prototyping, as part of our visualization, our model making processes?
Sure, I'll have a go at that. The basic starting point should always be the same, that the fundamental understanding that a room's shape, its form, its volume, and its materials are the things that fundamentally affect how it's going to sound, right? So you have to know and understand that from the beginning. So the first step in the analysis is, what do I want to do in a space? Who am I doing it for? And therefore, what are the right conditions to be able to deliver that to the people who are going to experience that space? And all too often, the starting points are usually wrong. That's where the first thing happens, that somebody decides the room is going to be 20 feet tall, when really, from an acoustic standpoint, only needs to be 10 feet tall. So real sort of starting with the basic fundamentals. And that empirical knowledge, any good acoustic consultant knows the answer to those questions. And in fact, they're pretty easy to find on the web too. So doing that, thinking about that first is important. The next step beyond that then is, when you're working closely in a design team situation, you can take those principles and you start to expand them. So you start to think, as Ben kind of touched on, what do you want people to feel? Why do you want them to feel it the way that you want them to feel it? Who's it for? And listening to speech is very different to listening to rock music, and that in turn is very different to listening to classical music. It's very different to working in a room with 100 other people trying to all perform slightly different tasks, right? So you really need to understand the subject matter in detail in order to be able to design the right conditions. The next step, I would say, the next step in our process usually is, having done that sort of the very basic work, then you start to think about, and of course you want to push the boundaries around shape, shape, form, volume, materials. Those things don't need to be static. You don't want them to be static. You want spaces to be unique. So the next step is, how do I start to analyze those things? And there are two-dimensional tools that allow you to have a look at how sound reflections are behaving in rooms. So again, some of those are becoming more prevalent on the web. and for plugins for programs like Rhino. The next step is to be able to analyze it in 3D. Firstly, just visually. So there are some pieces of computer analysis that you can do that allow you to look at sound from a particular source, see how it propagates in a room, and be able to make some changes to understand how the shape and form, the macro level shape and form, is affecting what's happening. The third step after that then is to go to an acoustic computer model, usually, to put the space in, to put the materials in, to put their properties in, how much sound they absorb, how much they diffuse, how much they reflect, and then use that as your next step of analysis. And usually each of these tools is kind of geared to a stage in the design process, right? So in an ideal world, what you're doing is using the right tool for the right job at the right time in that process and evolving as you go through it. And the great thing about the tools is they allow you to do two things, especially when you get to the point where you're starting to listen to things with your clients. And I would say that we actually start listening to projects with our clients very early on now, concept design and schematic design. Once you start to do that, you engage your client so they understand the implications of sound. So they experience it firsthand and they start to say, okay, I like that and I don't like that. I find that pleasant, I find that disturbing. They become very, very simple things to deal with. If you get it right then, your client's always going to say in value engineering later on, but if I take that out, is it going to sound bad? Is it going to sound like that poor example I heard earlier on? So it allows you to maintain the right things during the design process. It allows you to engage a broader community as well. So if you're doing a project in the urban environment and it has traffic noise or it has other noise, or you can allow people to experience those and understand what the impact of taking or adding sounds in to an environment can be. And then somebody mentioned biophilic sounds earlier on. You know, there are sounds in nature that we generally find, most of us find pleasant. Sounds of flowing water, the sound of wind in the trees, the sound of waves lapping on a beach, those sorts of sound, the sounds of birdsong. These are natural things that we're used to. Sometimes you can introduce, yeah, indeed. And you can start to introduce those sounds in order to be able to improve how an environment sounds when you have a challenging situation that you can't negate through the design alone. So thinking about all of those things holistically can lead you to the right solution, but it does require the right thinking from the outset.
Yeah, I love the idea of getting the clients involved, you know, and putting sound in their minds as a criterion for success or failure for any element of the project. That's so key. And, you know, I know that's just one small part of all the things that you just spoke about, Raj, but I think we have a related question. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I think that's really key there. Anybody else in terms of, you know, how can we sort of prototype acoustics? I know, Robbie, of course, you work with a consultant on some of your projects. Maybe we want to talk about that. Carolyn, in an interior scale, any suggestions there?
Yes, Raj, really, really great answer on so many threads. I think you saw my excitement when you were talking about even acoustic ecology and that idea that it's really the same type of physiological response on our body, similar to biophilic design, just hearing those natural sounds. And I wanted to also say, thinking about the schematic design. So from an interior designer's perspective, when you think about the sound zone map, it's really quite, I mean, they really can be so harmonious. When you have a collaborative space that perhaps is more engaging, conversational, versus maybe it's a space for quiet or heads down or contemplation, meditation. It's just amazing how when you really start to think about the way your space plan can really outline with the sound zone map, you'll already start with a really great strategy in the very beginning, even before you specify one product and get to the materiality part of it. So Raj, that was a really great point and something that interior designers can definitely take and action in projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to build on what Raj was saying earlier, and Carolyn. I think integrating acoustics in the process early is becoming a best practice, in my opinion. And all kinds of spaces benefit from that input. Even an office space early on, understanding the background noise levels of your HVAC system and how that's going to affect the room acoustics is critical, because, you know, in those early stages when you're making critical decisions like systems choice, you have to understand the implication of those decisions. And without acoustical input, I think you can even in those early phases, narratives, early DD, you can go down the wrong path if that input's not in early. And then I think too, what's great about having experts is just like architecture, I'm able to process far more nuance in architectural design than my clients are, and acousticians are able to hold far more nuance in acoustical design than architects are, and so on down the lane with all the experts. And so a good example of this is, I'm constantly being educated in the process by acousticians about things like, how did our hearing system evolve, right? We were born to be in the woods and be surrounded by a myriad of surfaces at different elevations and of different material qualities. And so our ears are really adept at hearing sounds in that kind of environment. And so when we make really sterile architecture with blank, smooth surfaces that go on endlessly, you may actually have the right NRC, you may actually have the right absorption, and it may be in the right places, but the kind of tactility of the acoustics becomes really important. Is it ringing? Is the high pitch too high? Are we isolating correctly? So all these things end up really mattering, even in the early decisions. Program adjacency is critical. Understanding where we're going to have a noisy mechanical room. So all of that input, I think, is critical to the beginning. And in terms of prototyping, I agree with Raj. Testing things and testing early is really critical. And doing so in computer and simulation environments is becoming more and more normal in our processes. I'm still pretty bad at some of the plugins, but I find the video is really helpful when we review them with our acoustician, and the sound rooms are critical too, so we can start to get the look and feel. So those processes, I echo what Raj is saying, are critical in the early stages, and they can set the course of a project rather than doing things in the later stages when you're less malleable to react. And then Abby, you asked a question about prototyping acoustics, and I think this is a great one. We do a lot of things like just getting material samples and sending them to our acoustician, so that can be a really simple way of integrating into your process. It doesn't have to all be very fancy, but getting the right fabric that's going to go to the air machine, you can see how much air gets through, which is a really quick test. We do those things all the time. And so I think mocking up and prototyping and sending those things to your acoustician are critical. On the Alliance, we sent chunks of the wall paneling and the mock-ups from Mateus to the acoustician so that we could fold that into the process. And one of the things that came out of that is something that we didn't really quite realize, which is the wood system was much stiffer than the early analysis models assumed. But the physical testing showed us that the surface was quite stiff. And so we changed the analysis models in response to what the physical mock-ups showed us, which was really surprising for everyone. And it really helped the acoustics in the end.
That's awesome. Yeah, so find the plugins, sound zones, get materials tested, and then Carolyn threw out the noise reduction coefficient. So learning some of those very basic sort of information that, even like acoustic panel providers and others will give you that data on some of their products. So, there's ways to gather the input, especially on simpler projects. We have a couple of questions here that link together, and I'd love to get a response on this because I think it's a good entryway for a lot of folks who might be listening in. And Ben, we might actually start with you on this, even though we know you're looking more at digital experiences maybe than physical spaces. Trevor says when a project is focused on solution for acoustic use, it gives a lot of leeway to the strategy for design. However, how do we help everyday projects understand and see the importance of sound and the benefits of an acoustic strategy? And then we have a link question. Shelley says, please share an experience you've had where you've successfully persuaded a client to pay attention to sound and acoustics. Thank you. So can we talk about any actual projects or situations where a stakeholder suddenly realized the importance of sound or where it made a big difference? So Ben, if you'd like to start, and everybody else start thinking of maybe a favorite story of yours about it.
So I'll share a really quick story, and then I'll sort of leave you with both a story and an opportunity, because there's a piece of work that I've been dying to do for a long time. And I'm pretty sure that the people on the call and on this panel are probably the kind of people that could actually make this a reality. So, having worked at Microsoft for 16 years, we have the luxury of some pretty highly amazing equipment, to the point we have an entire acoustic lab at Microsoft. In fact, we actually have an anechoic chamber that sits in one of our buildings on campus in Redmond, Washington. So much so that we actually got this anechoic chamber tested just a few years ago, and it was actually awarded the Guinness Book of World Records for being the quietest place on Earth. It was around about minus 26 dBA, which is almost as close to what's referred to as Brownian motion as possible, which is kind of crazy. And the reason for doing that, the reason for investing in that kind of technology is to improve everything from the way in which your voice interacts with computers to the way we begin to start to design specific pieces of hardware, to how we think about creating a set of software-generated voice-based algorithms. And so, it's a core part of our both hardware, software, and service design efforts. The second story I'll share with you, and I kind of want to pick up on something that Carolyn talked about before, this idea of kind of creating a set of multi-sensory experiences. I had the opportunity a few years ago to sit down with a recording artist by the name of Mandy Harvey. Some of you may have heard of her. I think she was a finalist on America's Got Talent maybe 4 or 5 years ago. To cut a long story short, she was diagnosed as being deaf at around about the age of 17 or 18. And she just happened to be at Microsoft one particular day, and someone had asked me to sort of spend a couple of hours with her, showing around and showing her some of the interesting technology that we use at Microsoft. And I was specifically showing her a piece of technology called HoloLens, which is some of the work that Microsoft's done around augmented reality or mixed reality. And she asked this really interesting question, which was, as a deaf performer, she said, have you got a sense of what you think the color of music looks like? And it was a relatively abstract question. So obviously I was curious and asked more. And she said, look, as a deaf performer, I'm very, very mindful that the experience of my concert when I'm performing live is not a particularly multi-sensory experience with someone that is deaf. But I'm convinced that there's a really interesting way that technology can help begin to start to bridge that gap. She sort of said, look, right now you can come into my concert and you can probably take something like a mobile phone and you can read a set of closed captionings which give you a sense of the lyrics, and you can feel the music as it's reverberating around the stadium. But wouldn't it be interesting if, I sung a particularly high note, you could actually match that with a particular color? Or if someone plays a particularly earthy riff on a bass guitar, what's the color that you would associate with that particular note? And I sort of said, look, I think there's technology. I think we could, in essence, build a set of, machine learning algorithms that would allow us to take, every single note and look at every single instrument that's played, and in essence, map a particular color to the way that particular instrument's played. And in essence, the experience that you would have for someone who is, let's say, deaf is not only could you visualize the concert, not only could you feel the music, but as each of those notes are played, you see these wonderful pops of color come up along with the closed captions at the bottom to create this incredibly immersive experience. And, like a lot of inclusive design projects, you kind of look at something like that, and there's no doubt it's going to have huge impact and benefit for someone who's deaf. But it's also going to have a huge amount of impact for anyone, because I just think it creates this multi-sensory experience that allows us to just get closer to the performer and really feel the experience of that concert. So I've been chatting with this performer for a long time. I think there's incredible potential there. It's really just a case of identifying how we can begin to start to build the model and how we would potentially leverage some incredible acoustic engineers to be able to make that a reality. So as I said, I kind of label that both an interesting story and at the same time an opportunity to do some really kind of cool work.
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to jump in with some project examples. Ben, we are going to have to talk offline because I have a group that we're getting together in the beginning of next year at some point. We've got a whole smattering of color and scientists and musicians that are interested in that exact same topic. So offline, we have to connect.
Love that.
Yes. But I did want to mention, just from the product and materiality standpoint, a couple of really exciting projects that working with, I'm a collaborator at Turf Design, and we are working on this idea. So really threading in a lot of what we said today, including, I also want to make sure, while we're talking about the ideal project and planning at the beginning, we also know we have a lot of retrofits. We understand that. And a few just kind of threads on the product story is this idea that maybe a product isn't just a static NRC. What if we had a product that can be dimensional and even work with a flat product? And so when you're actually thinking about the entire environment, similar to being in nature, where there's that little bit of an ebb and flow and a reflection and absorption of sound that feels more natural for all of us in a space. So that's a project we're currently working on. Little teaser here, you'll know more this month. And another really exciting project that we have been working on for over 18 months is a brand new color system where we have really focused on sensory design and how that will be as far as color, with this hypothesis that a palette can actually take you through an entire space, creating those lifts and those moments for someone who might be hypersensitive to those moments of calm and tranquility for somebody that might be hyposensitive, and all levels in between. So this idea that a palette can be harmonious with colors, something that we're currently working on and arriving at. It's been a really rewarding process, and we're just so thrilled that we're getting there on it.
Maybe, Avi, I'll just jump in and say it, that any client who has gone through the process of designing a building and has had major acoustic problems never tries to have them again. Right? So the awareness of what happens when it goes wrong is a big thing in changing people's attitudes towards how it's incorporated into the design process. The unfortunate thing is there are many clients who only ever build a building once. And it's a shame that for them, they don't have the opportunity to make sure it's done right, and they don't have professionals who are telling them that there's an opportunity to design it right. So I would say don't wing it. If you can find a good acoustic consultant, have them, even if you only have them consult at the very beginning of a project and not follow that through, they're going to set you in the right direction at the very beginning. And in some cases, projects can't always afford that, but do what you can and try and get an expert opinion early that will point you in the right direction. I'll also say that any client who's gone through the process of using a tool like the Arup Sound Lab, once they've experienced that, they never want to do a design without it, because it enriches the entire process for them and helps them understand the outcome, what they're going to get much, much earlier in the design process than they otherwise would. So I'd point people to the Arup website. If you just look up Sound Lab, there are some good examples there of work that's been done using that, and good examples that you can show people.
Yeah. Robbie, any aha moments with clients?
Any aha moments with clients?
Yeah. Go ahead. Anything.
Yes. I mean, I think there's always those moments of discovery on projects where what the professionals have in their head finally resonates with your group that you're working with. Trying to think of a really specific example. On the chapel project, all these rooms were circular, and at one point they were domed, and they were kind of intersecting. And we really intuitively understood what was happening, but they were really struggling with it. And we did a 3D print that was clear, and they could finally see those spaces. And I remember the aha moment. They were like, "Oh, it's a cylinder," and we're like, "Yes." I know that seems kind of simple sometimes, but sometimes the relationship between our drawings and our designs can be lost. So that was a cool moment. And the specific cylinder was shaped by the acoustics. It had a kind of blunted top. So the whole ceiling was this beautiful reflector, but it was hard for them to understand that geometry. So that was a cool moment.
Harvey, perhaps I'd say one more thing, which is in the absence of all of the tools and all of the, the more sophisticated stuff we've talked about here. I've also found that the most essential thing to do with a client at the beginning of a project is ask them about spaces they like the sound of, and that they don't like the sound of and they have problems with, and actually go together and listen to them and understand what they like and don't like about them. And I often encourage architects to, when they do that, to do it with their eyes closed, because then they get a better impression. Or rather than thinking with their eyes, they start to think with their ears. And it's good actually for the whole design team to do that. Think about experiencing the environment by blocking off one of your senses and see what you find different about it. And it really creates fundamental shifts in the way that you think about the built environment when you do that.
I think we should just adopt thinking with your ears as a motto for this discussion. That's really vital. Thank you so much for that, Raj. This idea that, just as we would, ask clients for references on the kinds of spaces they like, the kinds of materials they like, what resonates with them, on materiality or color or experience, it's really important to ask them on sound as well. So that's like an easy first step. Thank you so much for that. We've gone through a lot of different things today, and I just want to make an attempt at sort of threading them together. It's clear that acoustics needs to be part of early stage thinking in projects. And as Raj said, even before any software or tools or experts or acousticians come into the process, just making sure that you're thinking with your ears is really important. And knowing that that has a vital impact on the human experience of whatever it is that you're designing, whether it's a interior, a building, a physical space, or a digital space. I think all of those are really impacted by how we hear. And so that's really important. There are plugins and tools that you can use through your design process to look at that. Acousticians or acoustic consultants are really important partners on this process. So that's another big takeaway as part of this. And then, of course, knowing that handling acoustics can have benefits beyond just the auditory experience of a space, that good acoustics can help really elevate space, but can also, in the hands of a good acoustician or within a good design strategy, provide benefits that might be for budget, for climate, for health, for all sorts of other things. So really thinking about acoustics as a tool in a toolkit, on all of those fronts is really important. Ben, thank you so much for bringing in the idea of unintentionally excluding people. And I think also for that last really beautiful thought you had about crossing senses, thinking about how senses kind of overlap with one another and how we can really create those layered multisensory experiences. So building on what Carolyn said, think about sound alongside color, materiality, alongside sort of spatial procession, spatial zones, all the things that we think about as designers, and know that there is some exciting work on the frontiers of those things that can prove to be really beneficial to include, all kinds of users. And that last idea of inclusion, I think, has really threaded through our discussion today. When we're talking about sound in a space, we have to understand not everybody hears the same, not everybody prefers the same kind of sound, and that sound and the ability to hear or participate has also been historically used as a barrier. Robbie, you started us off thinking about segregated spaces, and yet many spaces are segregated in that sense, right? So if you think about even as we were talking about, a conference room, who sits where at a table and how audible they are to others at the table, right? So there's many barriers that we've put up, and sound has unfortunately been used as a way of dividing. And, we have to think about how we can use sound as a way of including, which is not to say that, all spaces should be auditorily accessible to everyone. Walls exist for a reason, but I think the idea is that we are intentional about including people within spaces, not unintentionally excluding people, as Ben put it. Thank you all so much for today's discussion. I really appreciate all the time you've spent with us. Thank you so much for everyone in the audience for listening to us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. If, as we said, today's session is CU accredited, so please reach out if you've not already about that. Metropolis's programs continue with a think tank discussion this Thursday. So if you haven't registered for that, please do so. You can, of course, I urge you to look at Arab's work, especially the Sound Lab, to look at Trehan Architects projects, to look into some of the work that Carolyn has been doing with turf design on the connections between sound, and of course, look out for those new products that are coming out. And of course, Ben's team at Microsoft has produced some excellent guides around accessible design and inclusive design. Please, they're easily accessible through the Microsoft website, so please take a look at that. I do hope that all of that will inspire you to think with your ears. I'm going to steal that from Raj again. Thank you so much for that. Just one last call for all of you who are in the interior design profession, work with interior designers, are in product manufacturing and work with interior designers. Please consider taking the Interior Design Pledge for Positive Impact. It is the first comprehensive framework for sustainability in interior design that unites concerns around climate, health, and equity. And of course, sound is one of the things we do have to think about when you think about health and equity. So please go ahead, sign the pledge, take the pledge, and join us. Signatories of the pledge will receive resources and tools and guidance over the next year in order to understand how they can start moving towards meeting the commitments of the pledge. So please go ahead and take that. It is the first most important tool we have as interior designers to start to make a positive impact with our work. For everybody else, thank you also so much for joining us, and I hope all of you have a great evening.